Good morning, Dev Day. How are you? Good? Good? It will be better after the session, hopefully. So, I want to start with something that really bothers me as a front-end developer. I will call it the problems of storage in your client side. As you already know, we have a few ways to store our data in the client side. Who uses cookies to store data in the client side? Raise your hands. If you ever did some server-side development with ASP.NET, you are using cookies underneath in order to create your sessions. Okay, so we are using cookies. But my opinion about cookies is as follows. It's such an old technology. And if I need to store something in a cookie, I only have 4 kilobytes of storage. That's a pity, because it's such a small thing. And we have tons of megabytes of data that we would probably want to store. Another thing about cookies is once you do a request, once you want to use cookies, the cookies are sent from the server to the client and backward every time you refresh the page. So, okay, I'm going to send all my data around and around again and again and again and again. Fun. Not really. Who uses local storage in his application? Raise your hand. How do you feel about using local storage in your applications? Is it fun? When I use local storage in my application, it's probably going to look like this. Okay? Because I'm going to put everything inside of the local storage, and yeah, we'll talk about those things in a while. So we have a very big problem. And these are currently the main options to use when we are using storages in the database, or we can use something that probably you heard about, or you used it, or you haven't heard about it, or didn't use it yet, and hopefully you will use it after this topic, after this session. So we need a new solution, and I will present to you IndexedDB in a few minutes. But before that, who I am. I'm Gil Fink. I'm the CEO of Sparksys. It's my own consulting company. It's a one-man show. I have only one employee, me, myself, and I. This is 3 employees, unfortunately. I wrote the book Pro Single Page Application Development. You can find it in A-Press. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the last 7 years. I wrote some official courses that Microsoft technology centers or learning centers are teaching everywhere, including the course called HTML5 programming. So if you did that, search my name in the 7th page, because Microsoft doesn't give credit to the authors of the courses. I'm running a meetup in Israel called GDG Rashlatz, which is my hometown, and currently I'm helping to organize Angular App, which is a new Angular-related conference in Israel that will be in the 17th of November. You're all welcome to come. We have a lot of known speakers, international known speakers in the Angular environment, which are coming to help us to make the conference very cool and very worthwhile. Okay? So what we are going to do here in the next 30 minutes is something like that. I'm going to talk about IndexedDB and then about libraries. But before I'm going to talk about IndexedDB, let's rephrase the beginning of the session. We have cookies. Again, it's something that we pass from the server to the client and back forward. It's small. It only have 4 kilobytes for each cookie. We use that mainly for sessions and nothing more, or for authentication things. It's not API. It doesn't have a friendly API. Have you ever used it you will probably understand that it's string manipulation every time. You need to manipulate the strings inside of the cookie. Another option to store data in your client, again, it's the local storage or the session storage. It depends on what you want to implement. Every type of that storage has a different lifetime. You get around 5 to 10 megabytes for each domain, and the local storage is currently only available on the client side. It has only 5 functions and 1 property. We'll see that in a demo in a second. And the third option, before we learn about IndexedDB, is Web SQL. Have you ever used Web SQL? There is someone who used that. Don't use it. It's deprecated. It's deprecated for years, but still people are currently using it. From time to time, I'm coming to consult in some company, and they say, hey, we use Web SQL. Don't. It's 3 years since it was deprecated. Okay, so these are the main options, but we'll see the IndexedDB in a few seconds. But before that, let's play with local storage, because everybody likes to use local storage. And so I'll open my browser, and inside the browser, for each domain, I get a local storage object, which has a few members or a few methods. For example, I can do something like local storage.set item.gilgil, and I'll have a key, which is a string base, and a value, which again is string based. Not such a cool thing to use strings. If I'll open the application tab, you can see here the local storage for this web page, which is Google. And here is my new item that I set. And here are some things that Google is setting for us. And as you can see, because the values are probably in JSON format, you will have to serialize them and deserialize them whenever you want to use them. So this is something which is annoying a little bit, all this serialization. Another problem is that I can clear the storage by my hand. So let's remove some items from the developer tools. Probably Google will stop functioning right now, not. And I can do some manipulation on the storage. Again, let's set Gil, and let's just remove the item. I can do that by doing it with the key, and I can search for something in the storage by key. Let's say, let's give me the key for Gil, which will be Gil, or nothing, because I removed that. So let's add it again, and let's do key, and oh, again, it's not available. Yeah, my fault, because I can't touch it. I need to give it, sorry, I need to give it not the key here, but let's put 1, and let's put 3, I think. No, so it will be 4 for Gil. Okay, so I need to put an index, not my name. And I will get the key, and then I can iterate on all the storage if I want by retrieving keys and using those keys to do something. Okay, so this is local storage. It's annoying. We have serialization, deserialization, things like that. And most of the time when I come to companies, I see most of the client-side data is thrown into a local storage. The retrieval from a local storage is fast, but it's not fast enough in very severe data scenarios. And this is why W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, introduced IndexedDB. So what is IndexedDB? IndexedDB is a full-blown database in your client side. It's based on indexes. It gives you object storage. That this is, if you know SQL, it's the tables. It's not really tables. Every object storage has keys and values, again, but those keys and values are stored as we expect and not serialized and deserialized every time. If you are using local storage, they are serialized. You need to serialize or deserialize them. You get from IndexedDB the objects. It's reliable. It's fast. It's really fast if you're using indexes. But we have a few caveats with it. It has limited storage. Like local storage, you get 5 to 10 megabytes for each IndexedDB for each domain. The user can clear the entire IndexedDB like in local storage, like in any other data storage that you can use in the client side. And it's local. So if you want to use some server technology to manipulate IndexedDB, you can't. And that is pros and the cons, okay? Because I don't want server sides to manipulate my IndexedDB. So how IndexedDB works, again, we have object storage to store objects in key value format. For each object store, you can add indexes that you can do fast retrieval by some index. You can have cursors to go around or to read the entire object store. And it's really satisfying offline options. There is a session by Phil Nash about service worker. Here's Phil. He will probably talk about offline scenarios, and IndexedDB really suit this session because, or this scenario, because you can store data in the client side when you're offline, and then you can synchronize that data once you go online. Another place that you can use IndexedDB, which is very, very known, is mobile, in mobile scenarios. Have you wrote some Cordova or PhoneGap or anything else in the past? I wrote some apps, and those apps used IndexedDB in order to store the data and for fast retrieval. So this is another scenario where IndexedDB really fits. Again, I said it's a database. You have the option to use an object store, a cursor on the object store, a cursor on indexes. You can set indexes, but I'm talking, and you probably want to see some code, no? Yes, so 2 seconds and we are in the code. Some caveats about IndexedDB, which are good, not caveats. IndexedDB is asynchronous, as asynchronous API. So everything that you want to do against IndexedDB, as opposed to local storage, which is synchronized, is you have to use the API. You have to request things. You have to request to open the database. You have to request a transaction, and you have to wire everything up with on success or on error for each and every aspect. The IndexedDB object is located on the window object inside of your browser, so window.indexedDB or only IndexedDB, and you can start working with IndexedDB. Show me the code, please. Stop boring me with words. Okay, so first of all, when you want to use IndexedDB, the first thing that you want to do is to open a database. Okay, so you'll use IndexedDB.open, you give it a name, and you give it a version. If that version already exists, nothing will happen. If that version doesn't exist, you will get an event that we'll talk about later on upgraded needed, and with that event, you can change or manipulate the IndexedDB schema. This is the only time that you can change the schema of the IndexedDB. Okay, so once you open the IndexedDB by a version, be notified that there is an option to change the IndexedDB. Again, as I said, it's asynchronous, so you request to open the database, and then you get on success or on error callbacks. With the response, you can get out the IndexedDB response, which is the request.result, and you can continue with your database in hand. Okay, so we opened our database. What else? So I mentioned that you can create object stores only on the event of onUpgraded needed, okay? So how do you do that? First of all, you go and you wire an event handler for onUpgraded needed. Then you use the create object store function in order to create it. You give it a name and you give it a key path. A key path is the index, which property is going to be the index of this object store. For example, in this example, ID is going to be the index. You can configure that index to be incremental if you don't have IDs or you don't generate IDs, or non-incremental. That means that you will have to create those indexes or those IDs by yourself. Once you request the create object store, you can do things with that object store. For example, you can create an index. What is an index? I'm just giving the index some name. What is the property of the object that I'm going to use as the index, and if it's unique or not. This is a constraint that I can give for each and every index. For example, if I'm indexing an email, it should be unique. If I'm indexing some first name or last name, it can't be unique, or else I'll get exceptions during the work with the object store. The object store has some functions that you can use. For example, in this slide, it's add. I'm adding a new object into the store, into this, call it a table. Once we created our database, the next thing that you want to do is query it. How do you do that? Or how do you do manipulations on the object stores? By creating a transaction. The transaction can be read-only or read-write. You can force it to be read-only or read-write. And you will request from the object store a new transaction. And you can wire to the onComplete or on error on the transaction or on the operation that you are doing with the transaction. Okay, so there are two separate ways to manipulate transactions. Again, one when the transaction completed, or inside of the transaction on success for each and every operation. Okay, the operation on success will happen before the onComplete, and then we get the onComplete event handler. Using a cursor, I want to run over or iterate over some object store. What can I do? I can open a cursor using an open cursor function, and then I iterate it with the if and cursor.continue function. That's all. Be aware that continue is a keyword that is restricted in JavaScript. So when you use that function, use it with the not curly brackets, with brackets. Okay? Why? Why I will probably want to use the brackets instead of dot? Okay, in production environments, we minify our code. If you are minifying the dot continue, you might get exceptions because the minifiers don't know what to do with continue. The same is with delete, okay? So if you're using continue or delete keywords, and the object store does use that, for minification purposes, please use brackets instead of dot. In this example, I'm using the dot notation. Once I'm creating some index, I can work with indexes. I created an index on the email or name or something like that. I can fast retrieval some elements from the object store using the index function. First of all, I'm asking for the index, and then I can get some things from the index itself and not from the entire table. Okay, so I can do that also, and it's faster to use indexes, but like in SQL, you don't want to make everything indexable. Okay, please don't do that. I can index everything in my object store. I don't want to do that. I want to put indexes only for fast retrieval for some features or properties in my database. So let's see a demo of IndexedDB. Okay, so we have here a web page, and I'm going to run it at first and play with it a little bit, and then we'll see the code behind. Okay? So in this web page, I'll open the application tab underneath. I'm going to look at IndexedDB currently. I've created an IndexedDB called PeopleDB, and inside of PeopleDB object store, I have an object store called people. You can see that I have two objects. The first one is John Doe, and the second one is Don Doe. Okay, and I can add some new things into this object store. For example, let's put Phil at company.com and add record, and then I will refresh it. Nope, something didn't happen. Just a moment. Okay, it took some time to refresh the IndexedDB somehow. Okay, so here is Phil. It has a primary key of 5, and we see the object Phil here. We can delete records. Let's delete the record by its ID, by its primary key. Let's delete it, and let's refresh, and let's look at this thing here, and something strange here. Okay. And I can print things from this IndexedDB. Okay. Currently, we have only Don Doe and Phil. I don't know why this feature isn't synchronized right now, but as you know, the god of demos isn't with me right now, probably because Google are laughing at me or something like that. What? Yeah, I know. I did refresh here and refresh here, and it's not working. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So we have a refresh here, and this refresh doesn't work. Thank you very much, Google developer team, for the dev tools. I'm not biasing them. I really appreciate their tool. Okay. So let's see some code examples. So here is the page. The HTML is really not interesting. The real thing here happens in the code of the JavaScript. Before I'm continuing, one thing that you should be aware of, it's the IndexedDB support. Okay, IndexedDB support, it started to be supported by IE 10. So if you're working in IE 6, 7, and 8, and 9, sorry for you, because you're working in those browsers. And we would like to support all the browsers. So in the past, when you use Chrome, IndexedDB was created with WebKit IndexedDB. When you use Mozilla, it was in Moz IndexedDB, and for Microsoft, it was MS IndexedDB. So this line here checks whether IndexedDB is implemented in your browser, and then set it as a variable. The second variable here is DB, which will hold my database, and I have some data that I want to fill in inside of the IndexedDB. Once the application loads, what I'm doing is I'm opening my database, PeopleDB. I'm giving it a version. That version will help me, if the IndexedDB isn't available, to run the onUpgrade needed, and I'm putting inside of this DB, this variable, the result once the database was created. Okay, here I'm creating my object store. I'm creating 2 indexes on that object store. You saw those indexes here. Okay, these are the indexes. And I'm just iterating the data source, and I'm adding that data source to people data to the object store. I'm wiring two event listeners, and once somebody is clicking the add button, I'm just creating a new read-write transaction to the people object store. And once I have the object store in hand from the transaction, I'm doing objectStore.add, and I'm adding that object. In the delete scenario, you can see here that I use the brackets. Again, for minification purposes, use that with the bracket notation, not the dot notation, or else you will get strange things while minifying your code. Okay, so this is an example of how to delete things from the object store. And this is transaction, a read-only transaction that runs over the object store in a cursor and just print out the output to my web page, this list here. That's all. So we know about IndexedDB. And are there any problems with IndexedDB? Okay, so yes, there are problems. First of all, the boilerplate problem. You saw how much code I use in order to do some simple thing like opening a database or adding something. I need to create a transaction, and then from the transaction, I'm grabbing the object store, and then I'm doing some manipulation on the object store. This is very verbose. There is no support for queries. So if I want to do SQL-style queries, like select something from the object store, I will need to create my own language. There is no full text search in IndexedDB. It's just index database. So if you want to do some text searches, you will have to create that. And more and more and more and more. There are a lot of problems. This is where I catch my head. Okay, he talked about IndexedDB for 25 minutes and nothing is going to get out of it. I'm not going to use it. So you can use it. And there are libraries to the rescue. First of all, the main library that I suggest you to use when you are using IndexedDB is PouchDB. Okay? If you ever used npm cache for cached repositories, underneath it's everything that you cache is inside of PouchDB. Okay? So PouchDB is probably the first place to look at when you want to use IndexedDB. It has fallbacks, so if you are working in an environment that needs to be ran on i6, 7, not 6, 7, but i7, 8, 9, then it will fall back to local storage and fall back to other options of storages that really supported. If you are coming from Angular background, then there is a service which is recommended called Angular-IndexedDB. That you can use. If you are using Angular 2, which was released 4 or 5 hours ago, yes, yeah. So after 2 years of working on that framework, they released it today. So there is an experimental IndexedDB library that I wrote in TypeScript, which you can use. Probably you can use it without Angular 2, but I just made it applied to Angular 2. So if you're using Angular 2, then you have the option to use the library I created. And let's take a look at the library, how to use that library. Okay, so here is an Angular 2 application. And what I'm using is the Angular IndexedDB here, which is the type that I created to use as DB, and you can create new in Angular IndexedDB. It looks the same, but it will wire everything for you. It will open the database. It will do the entire thing. You can create a store. You can then manipulate that store by using some functions like get by key or get all or open cursor, and you will have less and less boilerplate to use in order to create your transactions and everything else. So as I said, you can probably use it without Angular 2, but I wrote it directly to Angular 2, okay? So this is another option that you can use. Let's summarize. So you learned about IndexedDB, which is a full-blown index database in your client side. It really helps you to support offline scenarios and mobile scenarios in order to store some data in the client. One caveat, though, is don't put secured things inside of IndexedDB, please. Everything is not private, it's public. You can see it in your developer tools and et cetera, But I encourage you to go and start using IndexedDB in your applications, because you have a database that probably most of you don't use today, and you can use it instead of using local storage. Use the IndexedDB with libraries, hopefully with PouchDB or any other library that you can find. And I, again, encourage you not to be afraid from databases in the client side. Some resources. So you can go and learn about IndexedDB more deeply in MDN. You can go to my repository and look at the code that I wrote. It's online. You can visit my website, or you can find me in Twitter at Gil Fink. It was a very pleasure to talk with you about IndexedDB. And again, don't be afraid of client-side databases. Use them today. Thank you. Okay, now if somebody wants to leave, you can leave right now. I'm going to stay here, and you can ask me questions and everything that you want to know related to front-end development. Don't be embarrassed to go outside if you don't want to hear the questions or things like that, okay? So anyone has any question? Yes?
Do we have a simple method to serialize database and, for example, send it to the server side and restore?
Okay, so the question is, it's for the video, if we have a way to serialize the entire database, the entire IndexedDB, and then send it to the server. Probably you can do that, but I urge you not to do it, okay? If you want to synchronize some data from the IndexedDB, you can create some mechanism to create quotas and then send those quotas, not the entire database. You don't want to send 10 megabytes of data to the server and back. It's not cookies, okay? Any other question? Yes.
Yeah, so that's not really related to database stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about frontend, and I would like to know your opinion about React.js. I
Oh,
know it's
okay, so the question is, what's my opinion about React? I'm not biasing React and nothing else. I really love the framework, sorry, not the framework, the library, okay? Because I used it in the last 8 months, and it's really cool. On one hand, it's fast and everything else. On the second hand, I'm a consultant, and I have customers that uses Angular 1, Angular 2, and React. So I won't choose for you the library that you're going to use in the future, but all of those libraries are really good. It depends on the scenario that you need to use them, okay?
Okay, fair enough, thanks.
Yes, any other question? Okay, so you can go to eat, and you have 5 minutes before everybody else. So grab your food, and thank you.